Fusion Patrol is a listener-supported podcast. Find out how you can help support us at patreon.com/Fusion Patrol. This is the Fusion Patrol podcast. Each week, we look at a different science fiction TV episode or movie and overanalyze it to within an inch of its life. Welcome to the discussion. Hello and welcome to another episode of Fusion Patrol. I'm Eugene.
And I'm Simon.
And tonight we are looking at the last in our coverage of Doomwatch, the movie Doomwatch, Winter Angel. Synopsis. A man named Sam is spying on the movements of some shipping containers. He makes a report via telephone box to the answering machine of an unknown Confederate detailing that more containers have arrived and that one of them is hot. Before he can finish, his car has been backed up against the phone booth and a killer gasses him to death, destroying his photographic evidence at the same time. On a cow farm, Ewan is the man who received the answer phone message from Sam. Ewan, in turn, calls and leaves an answer phone message for Dr. Spencer Quist, alerting him to the situation. Ewan goes out to gather more info. Dr. Neil Tannerhill is a theoretical physicist at a major university in England, leading expert on black holes, protege of Dr. Quist, and a man who's about to move, along with his medical doctor wife, Meg, and children, to work at MIT in the United States. He's been receiving cryptic postcards from Quist, another of which arrives today, containing equations. Unable to figure out what the equations mean, nor how to operate a telephone to call and ask Quist what they mean, Tannerhill poses them to his postgrads to see if they can figure them out. They are unable to completely solve them, but posit that two of them have to do with black holes, and one may be about pollution. A team from Special Branch and Military Intelligence search the farm where Ewan lives. They discover he knows about the latest containers and has been in contact with Quist. Special Branch warns Military Intelligence that Quist is too high profile, a national institution. They'll need higher clearance to do anything about him. Ewan is camped out, recording and the arrival and offloading of the containers in a pouring rain. One of the containers breaks free, falls, and wedges sideways in the loading chute and starts a fire. The workmen use another container like a hammer to try to unjam it. This second container breaks open, dropping highly radioactive fuel rods and causing a huge explosion and release of blue radiation. On the base, Military Intelligence take over the search for Ewan, and Ewan just escapes with his camera as they close in on his hide. He evades them till morning when he encounters the farmer from the farm where he lives and works. He passes the camera off to him, then sets off, leading them away. He is captured by Military Intelligence and taken for a one-way helicopter ride out to sea. Next, we meet Luke Godwin and Dr. Terry Riley, members of the Animal Nation Warriors. Luke has received a fax ostensibly from Ewan asking for help, but it appears to be in the wrong handwriting. But that will have to wait. They've got something big planned tonight, and it's not just sex on top of a building. That night, Quist meets up with Tannerhill and his wife at the awards ceremony held by Autogene, a private research firm. At the event, Quist tries to convince Tannerhill that his research can be used for military or evil purposes. Tannerhill denies that. His work is theoretical and about black holes, which have no practical purpose. Quist also tells him that Tannerhill's work may be taken up by the Pandora Corp, and they've been taking in nuclear waste at a disused nuclear plant. Tannerhill is introduced to Hugo Cox, computer genius with intel on Pandora. During a speech, Luke hacks a video of animal cruelty to play on the screens while Terry interrupts on behalf of the Animal Nation Warriors, who storm in protesting. Quist cheers them on. They escape to the roof where I think they may have sex. Quist is detained by the authorities and held without questioning all night by Military Intelligence. When Special Branch find out, they release him and suggest that he should file a complaint. Zeist, boss of Pandora, arrives at the nuclear plant and demands a status from Toby Ross, chief scientist. Ross starts to enumerate the casualties, but Zeist just twirls his mustachios and cuts him off. No, I don't give a damn about that. What about the plant? It's bad. Our black hole is oscillating, and it's going to bust things up and destroy the UK if we don't give it more power from the electrical grid. Nope, Can't do that. PR disaster. And people will find out. Find some other way. Terry and Luke follow up on Ewan's facts the next day. It was the farmer who faxed them. He lost his daughter to radiation and called in Ewan's people to investigate. He turns over the recorder to them, and they are horrified at what they see. Terry tries to get the tape to Quist, while Luke decides to break into the plant and gather evidence. Luke scales the building just as Hugo hacks into the plant's security cameras. He watches him enter an airlock and then approach the black hole containment area. The intense gravity pulls him to his death. Military intelligence is following Terry with plans to kill her, making it look like an overdose. She evades them and gets to Quist's home, but he's not there. She leaves the tape in his mailbox, but then calls and leaves an answer phone message for him. Unfortunately, his lines are tapped, and military intelligence are onto it. Quist has gone to see Tannerhill. He must take up the mantle of Doomwatch. There is no one else. Toby Ross was Quist's other protege, and he is working for Pandora. Pandora is privately owned but staffed entirely by military nuclear experts. They've collected over 2,400 tons of nuclear waste from the Ukraine, some of it weapons grade, and there is no oversight or accountability on them at all. If Ross's black hole experiment fails, there are but two outcomes: vaporizing the UK or a China syndrome meltdown resulting in the total destruction of the Earth in just 1,230 years. Either would not be a good result. Quist returns home, finds the tape in his letterbox, but exhausted, falls asleep in the chair without listening to his answer phone. He doesn't hear a call from Hugo either. Hugo is trying to tell him about Luke, and when he can't reach Quist, he tries to call Tannerhill, who is at church and also doesn't receive the call. Military intelligence breaks into Quist's home and rigs the gas to explode, killing Quist and destroying the only copies of the full Doomwatch master tapes, thus completing a job that the BBC only aspired to. Hugo and Tannerhill receive Quist's legacy, digital copies of the Doomwatch files. The torch now passes on to them. At the funeral, Ross is there, and Tannerhill quietly confronts him. Ross confides that there's a problem, and Tannerhill demands that he get in to see it. He agrees. Later, as Tannerhill prepares to go in, Hugo provides him with insurance. A classic, "If I don't return in a few hours, this story will be plastered all over the news tonight." Terry, unaware that Luke is dead, breaks into the plant to find him. Hugo spots her on the hacked security cameras and warns her to get out. She doesn't heed his warning, even when she sees that military intelligence have spotted her and are in pursuit. With Hugo's help, they are tricked into the airlock and then through the door that led to Luke's death. Like night follows day, the bad boys from military intelligence meet the same fate as Luke. Tannerhill immediately assesses the situation and concludes they need to throw more power at it. Zeist objects, but Tannerhill's force of personality overcomes all, and, after blacking out the entirety of the UK, the black hole is brought under control. Black holes are forever, and this one, once created, will never go away, nor will the potential it will destroy the world. They must be ever vigilant. So Doomwatch, Winter Angel, I'm going to only guess that this was intended to be a pilot for a new potential series.
Indeed.
And I have not the slightest clue why they call it Winter Angel.
I'm assuming it has something to do with Hugo Cox's computer interfaces.
Interesting computer interface, yeah. Yes, that was, I don't know. There was no explicit reference to it. I could also wonder if it was something to do with the cold that was being generated by the black hole or the equipment around the black. I don't know. It was just a weird name.
I mean, it kind of sounds cool, but...
Well, I suppose. Yeah, it's no patch on Tomorrow the Rat. But anyway, what did you think of this film?
I was rooting for this. I got to say, I think there should be a Doomwatch revival, and obviously
yeah.
I knew that this hadn't happened, so I guess the chances are there was some reason for that. But I was hoping it was more that it was a commercial and critical failure, not knowing anything about it. It was weird. I mean, it's not the kind of thing. It's not the kind of thing I would expect Channel 5 to do. And although it had a kind of a style of its own and a reasonably kind of consistent tone to the way it was filmed and directed. Bits of it I thought, this is good, yeah. And bits of it I thought, what the hell were you thinking? I mean, what?
I can say that having watched it, I would not bother to watch it again. I don't think it's good. I don't really think it's Doomwatch either. And I mean, Doomwatch is pretty broad, what Doomwatch can and cannot be, but it just...
So why is it not Doomwatch?
Well, is every melodrama about a nuclear disaster Doomwatch? No. Is the China syndrome Doomwatch? No, it's not. It's just it's so disconnected from the actual nature of Doomwatch being a government oversight organization that's keeping track of scientific...
Oh no, that's interesting.
See, to me, this felt like this is some crackpot. You know, it clearly sides with the radical environmentalists, like the Animal Nation warriors, and Quist standing up and applauding them. And I don't know that Quist would be that man. I mean, yeah, it's many years later. Maybe he has just kind of deteriorated into a bitter old man. But I don't know.
I've got a big question mark over that in my notes. I mean, I did wonder what's happened in 27 years that supposedly had happened. I'm really interested in what you think is and is not Doomwatch about this, because I really couldn't disagree more with you that Doomwatch has to be government oversight. That doesn't seem to me in the least bit essential to the essence of what the show is about. On the other hand, I do agree with you. This is not Doomwatch.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's just delete the word Doomwatch from this script. Call it Armageddon Files, and rename Quist to Jones. Would you have guessed this was Doomwatch if you'd watched this? I mean, no, you wouldn't. You just go, yeah,
I don't know. I think I might have done.
You might think it's a bit Doomwatch-esque, maybe, but I kind of don't get it.
I mean, there's a whole bunch of things I do not think Doomwatch has to be. So if I was looking at something going, is this Doomwatch? I would not think, well, it has to be set in, 1970 or 70. It has to be set between 1970 and 72. I would not think it has to be about a bunch of men in a government office overseeing.
Okay, well, let me address that one, because Doomwatch is, amongst other things, a political animal. It is a thing that the government has created that the government doesn't want, or that the government wants to control, and the government cannot control because of Quist, or for a variety of reasons. And that is part of the fabric of what it is. Taking Doomwatch out of that and turning them into just another private group of concerned people makes them perpetual outsider activist status. And that is a different, that's the difference, really, to me. And
no.
This suffers so much from the most worst cliches of, we want to make a follow-up TV series that was really popular. What do we do? And we're going to pass the torch on to a new generation of people. It's going to be a completely different style. It's going to be a completely different tone. It's going to be completely different actors. But how do we pass the torch on? I know. Let's bring in one character from the old show and kill him off so that they're guilted into taking up the mantle of... I've seen that so many times when they try to revive a show, that I was really disappointed in that aspect of it. It's like, wow, you guys just read this right out of Stereotype Script 101. But I don't see it other than I knew Quist, so I guess we call it Doomwatch. But apart from that,
I don't disagree with you about the cliches in terms of it being a reboot. I don't disagree with you that it's not Doomwatch. The thing that I differ on, I guess, is that to me, I mean, yes, Doomwatch is a political animal, absolutely a political animal, but that doesn't mean that it has to be a government department. That doesn't mean it has to be. I mean, it obviously did become that, particularly in the third series, where it was all about the kind of civil service aspects and working for the minister all of the time. But actually, again, what we're talking about there is the context is it's 1970 whatever, and you're in the middle of a completely different political scenario. It's the whole, the post-war consensus aspect of things. The civil service is hugely powerful. It's the civil service, it's industries, it's unions, and all of those are present in Doomwatch, the show, because it is about the politics of the time. This is 1999, so it needs to be about the politics of the time. It doesn't, therefore, need to be bogged down in the trappings of what the show was in the early 1970s. I would have preferred it,
including any of them, including the name Doomwatch.
Well, the name is the name of the program. That was the other big thing. I was thinking, what are you going to pick on that makes Doomwatch Doomwatch? Does there have to be a big computer called Doomwatch in it? For me, no, absolutely not. The point about it is it should fulfill the function of Doomwatch, the show, but it needs to reinvent what that means for 1999. And I entirely agree with you that it's completely the wrong way to do that, to try and draw some kind of continuity through the fact that one of your characters was in the show, but as you say, it's done in an incredibly cliched way. And why do it if John Paul isn't available? And sadly, the reason is he was no longer with us by the time it was made. Then, let's not have Quist. I didn't get if you took Quist out of this story, I didn't really see what you would lose from it, other than, if you were a new viewer to this, other than the fact that it gives you some kind of legacy from the 70s show, it wouldn't mean anything to a new viewer, and it therefore wouldn't view any differently if you were to take him out.
I could fix this, more or less, not the structural problems, but so here's what I would do instead. Quist should not be in it. Tanner Hill, it's okay if Tanner Hill was his protege.
Absolutely.
Right? There is this, I knew Quist, I knew what he stood for, I share some of his values because he is the one who mentored me, and I'm a brilliant physicist, he's a brilliant physicist, that's fine. Hugo Cox, absolutely. Hugo Cox's freaking computer, he could have named it Doomwatch in honor of the old computer. He could have been the guy. He could have been the guy that could have gone to Tanner Hill and said, look, I was a big fan of Quist before he died 20 years ago. And I have been working, I've got this group of people. We're working as an organization. I got my computer. I hack into stuff. I need your help. I had to turn to you because you and Quist and what they could have done it that way. They wouldn't have had to bring in a frankly lackluster Quist replacement just to be a doddering old man to die. And you could have made an argument that said, sure, instead of this is Doomwatch 1972, this is a group of radicals that have decided to symbolically take up the name of Doomwatch to go after the same types of things in this different world of 1999. Then I still would have, I might have said, well, I don't know if you needed to do it, but okay, fine. I can live with that.
It's interesting.
It's not the same because there's no continuity really between them.
No, but I'm not sure you need. I don't know whether you need continuity, because you could have just made the show on the premise of Doomwatch, i.e., oversight looking at the ethics of unfettered scientific. It's not about watching the science. It's about watching the people who are using the discoveries of science. It's about the technology, really, rather than the science. But regardless of that, whatever you take as being the essence of the show, you could certainly reinvent that in a 1999 way without there being any connection whatsoever to the 1972 show. Now, I would like it to have that. It's interesting that you and I were thinking along similar lines. My fix was, hey, why don't we have Tarrant's daughter instead of Quist? Why don't we have her bringing Tannehill these files that she found after Quist died 4 years ago?
Yeah.
You know, that to me that would have been a much more interesting, an interesting way of making the link, and it would have been satisfying for me. But I think it would have been interesting in its own right from the point of view of new viewers who didn't understand who she was, because what you'd be talking about was a new, fresh character, but whose motivation for this was not that this was her own scientific quest or whatever, but that this was something that was important to someone who mattered to her, who had passed away, and who also mattered to Tannehill, and therefore you instantly create a connection, and boom, there's your new Doomwatch team.
Did you notice that they were very clear to draw a connection, well, clear-ish to draw a connection. This black hole, which was created, it was done by Ross, but basically it was done, Ross being the lesser physicist, probably drew upon the work of Tannehill.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So Tannehill is actually at fault for creating this genie that can't be let out of the bottle, much like Quist's obsession with the bomb was there.
Indeed.
Like, it's here forever. It could go off at any time now, and it's my fault. I've got to protect the world. Yeah, they gave him.
That's a great point.
Him the Quist,
and it's here forever. That ending, just that very ending. I mean, the bit before that we'll probably come to, but just the ending where Miles Anderson says, you know, we haven't solved anything. This is here forever. Was a very Doomwatch type of ending. I almost expected the proper titles to crash in at that point, in the way they often did in the TV episodes.
Now, one thing that did keep me guessing throughout the course of the episode, although I think I got it right in the end, was which of the people were going to be the Doomwatch team at the end of this. Mm-hmm. You know, which one's going to have to die for the Jeopardy and which one's going to have to carry on so that they'll have that core team going into the next attempt to, you know, the next, if it goes to series, you know, is it going to be Luke? Is it going to be Kelly? Is it going to be Hugo? Is it going to be the farmer? You know, it's like, which Greer knew it was never going to be the farmer, but, and yeah, it was, there was a little bit, you know, is Ewan going to make it? Nope. It's like, no, Ewan's not going to make it. That one's definitely dead. So, but I think it was a little disjointed because of all those threads, if you will.
But the problem with it, I don't think the threads themselves were a problem. The issue I had was that the characters that were introduced, I mean, this was longer than Doomwatch, the 1972 film, even with the adverts clipped.
It felt like it.
It felt twice as long. But the issue I had was that during the course of that, we didn't really get any development for any of the characters. So it was almost like, I mean, I don't have an issue with the number of characters. I've seen films that have many more characters than that and are successful. But it almost felt like they were introducing new characters because they weren't quite sure what to do with the old ones. They'd introduced them, but they hadn't found any way to develop them through the story. The only person who even gets the slightest bit of development is Terry Riley, in my opinion.
Yeah, Tannehill did a little. I mean, he
I guess.
He went from, not my problem to, I guess I have to solve this. So,
yes.
A little bit.
Yeah. But it was a kind of predictable.
that,
it was almost a story that had to be told about him, or that it was the journey he had to go on. And because that was so evident from the beginning, it didn't feel like he actually went anywhere because it followed a course that you totally expected. I grant you that is development of a sort, but
what about Toby Ross? Is he going to be in the Doomwatch 2 team?
I don't know. I found, because I mean, obviously another thing about Tannehill is that he's Trevor Eve, and therefore, you've got a good actor in the. I mean, I'm not criticizing anyone else, but a lot of people in this who I wasn't particularly familiar with and wouldn't particularly go looking for again. Miles Anderson, I was staring at him now, going, oh, goodness me, I know you're familiar from something. I've seen you in something. I'm sure it was by Alan Plater. I can't place what it is. And I jumped onto IMDb. Goodness me, I found out that he was Roger O'Neill in House of Cards. And I completely hadn't twigged that. He was actually in an Alan Plater thing, Oliver's Travels, where he was Baron Kite, which was what reminded me of him. And I hadn't connected those two roles either, because there's something about, he's so recognisable, his profile is so recognisable, and yet as an actor, he manages to give such a very different performance each time, even though you go, I know that guy, he looks familiar. I want him to be in it because I think he's really good, but I didn't necessarily think he was being set up for it.
It was kind of hard to tell. I mean, he definitely went from, you see, there's a little character development there. It was a little bit of, I look at what I can do, I'm Frankenstein, to at the end, he had at least made it an understanding that he had made a mistake and that fixing it was more important than his career or whatever it turned out to be in the end.
Yeah, he said there was some depth. There was some depth there because you could see the kind of conflicting motivations there, even though for most of the episode you could tell that his primary driver was that he was absolutely terrified by what he'd created and in whose hands he put it. At the same time, there were just those moments, those little glimpses you got of the pride and the absolute awe he had in the beauty of what he'd done, even though what he'd done was what was terrifying him so much.
So another thing about this film that felt wrong to me, it felt not Doomwatchy to me, was the overt religious tones throughout the story.
I thought they were weird.
They were weird.
I wondered where they were going.
I even feel like, okay, the premise of Quist sending equations to Tanner Hill is just stupid. And at every level, communication is a skill, and you have to talk to people and tell them you don't send them cryptic clues unless you're playing a game. And clearly Quist wasn't playing a game. But you could look at that after the grad students, not grad students, but the post-grads looked at it and said, well, I think this is about this and that. You could look at it and you could say, this is science reducing everything to an equation. Why would you tell about a problem that Doomwatch had about pollution with an equation, unless you're trying to be very, very reductionist and say everything can be reduced to an equation? And yet we explicitly get that ridiculous scene at the beginning where Tanner Hill says, I like this stained glass because it tells me that everything doesn't have an answer. So that's him saying, no, everything can't be reduced to an equation. And then we have all the other, like the computer interface that's all angels, and the fact that they go to church and miss out on important phone calls. And there are other instances of it. It's just kind of weird to me. And I'm not 100% sure what they were trying to get at, other than don't go where God says don't go, where angels fear to tread, where the winter angel fears to tread. I don't know. It's weird.
I quite liked the scenes with them puzzling over the equation. I mean, I agree with you. It didn't seem in character for Quist to be playing games in that way. Again, 27 years, I don't know. It's partly, I think, why I liked the idea of looking through Quist's papers posthumously, because, you could be rather than it being some equations he'd sent through. It could be puzzling over some files or something he was working on. But what I liked about the scenes were the style that the style that Tannehill had with his students, and the kind of attitude he had to his students, and the way in lecturing he was. I appreciate it, I guess, from a pedagogical viewpoint, but he was drawing things out through questioning, which is not necessarily the way that lecturers get stereotypically portrayed in TV shows. So I was appreciating that, and I was appreciating the fact that here you had a lecturer with a bunch of talented postgrads who I thought, when you say who was going to be the Doomwatch team, I thought they were going to be the Doomwatch team, and I would have preferred that in a way. I mean, it gives a completely different dynamic, but an interesting one. They didn't stand out to me particularly. In fact, they looked a little bit like your classic late 90s cookie cutter. Because we're making a show that's got a white man leading in it. We're going to have one woman and one black guy as the sidekicks, because, you know, women and black people are sidekicks. That's how things were. But yeah, it wasn't particularly anything to do with the characters themselves. It was more to do with the dynamics in those scenes. Can I
throw a parallel here? And like I say, I made fun of the way Quist communicated with Tannehill through equations. But this is exactly what Tannehill did to his grad students. So we could argue that Quist was posing a problem to stimulate Tannerhill's mind. But
that was exactly what I assumed.
At some point, that's fine in a classroom when you're trying to do whatever it is he's trying to do in a classroom. But anyway, that's not what Quist is doing. Quist, however, is trying to get Tannehill to do something, and that is an ineffective way to do that. I mean, maybe it might whet his curiosity, but no, that seems like a terrible.
No, I thought that it was unlike Quist to be playing games, which, as I say, was why I didn't think that was particularly appropriate. But it was exactly what it seemed to me that he was doing. To come back though to your other points, following on from that, I wonder whether the whole. I mean, I think there are a lot of ideas in this that are underdeveloped, as if they were looking elsewhere, not just at Doomwatch, at what the content of this kind of sci-fi show might be. And I think you've got to take into account in 1999 there was really one major sci-fi show in the English-speaking world, and religion was a big part of. You know, it was that whole dynamic was all about the religion on the one side and the paranormal on the other side, and between those two characters, their skepticism of each of those things. It doesn't fit here. No. I mean, I thought that they might be going somewhere with it, but it's just like they've chucked it in because they've looked at what's going on over there in the X-Files in much the same way that they've got all this kind of government conspiracy stuff in this. And it's not Doomwatch government conspiracy stuff. Yes, there is government conspiracy in Doomwatch episodes, unquestionably, but the government who are conspiring, who are doing the things that are causing the problems that Doomwatch is uncovering and exposing, are doing it through very clear and well-defined motives that once we understand what is happening, we can, if not sympathize with, we can at least empathize with to some degree.
Yeah, these guys are just murderous killers.
Exactly. They're kind of stereotypes because they're essentially playing the role of the men in black. And so there are a number of scenes in this that made me just think, what the hell was that? Why do that? Because it doesn't. This doesn't help the story. It's not dramatic. It doesn't help it as a political thriller, And it doesn't help it as a Doomwatch story. It just undermines it. So chucking the guy out of the helicopter, for example, I was just like, what? Why? There's no conceivable motive for how, how that's a rational, proportionate approach to take to the problem that you've got.
Would you make the comparison to say that perhaps since we have moved from 1970s world to 1999 world, whereas the government is not going to police itself, the government is not going to have an organization like Doomwatch, they have to take that up a step to show without that, they are a bunch of murderous bastards. And it's only with right-minded citizens. And in fact, there are like no people in this that aren't government that seem to, well, I guess Zeist is sort of, but by and large, everyone is sympathetic to the animal rights activists. I mean, heck, all the people were cheering at the rally or at the invasion of the animal warrior people at least I think they were. It's kind of poorly delineated there, but so I think, they are trying to draw that dichotomy between people good, governments bad.
I know.
And that's why we have to watch them. And
I agree. I agree. That's what they're trying to do.
No accountability, murder people, whatever.
What I think undermines that, and the whole kind of political thriller aspect of it, is that they completely fail to make that realistic or believable. I think, actually, in fairness, Zeiss is a character who does have a clear motive that is relatively consistent through the whole thing. You sort of know what he's after, and you can sort of see how he's going to react. He's not very bright, which makes him a not very interesting character. But the other heavies who are going around throwing people out of helicopters, they may be immoral. I don't have a problem with portraying government or agencies of government as behaving in an amoral way. But why throw someone out? It doesn't. Why? Why did they throw him out of the helicopter? What was that about?
Is it the way of murdering him that bothers you, or is it the fact that they did? It seems like a wasteful way to do it.
I don't understand what the end they hope to achieve is by doing it.
Kill everyone who knows anything about the project. Dead men tell no tales.
Yes, but dead men do. That's just that. That's not true. If you want to tell a story that is on a higher plane of reality, I think you have to take into account that modern forensic evidence will actually find quite a lot of stories in dead men, and therefore, if you're going to take someone out, you've got to weigh up the risks of what doing that involved. You've also got the fact that in doing it, you are, whether or not you personally have any moral objections to it, you are actually crossing a legal line that you cannot ignore. You could potentially be prosecuted for
murder
what you've done if you don't think that you have the kind of the backing for. Now that becomes a very interesting question, because you've then got to look at, or what is the organization that is protecting you as an employee, as a security operative or whatever, if you get into a legal situation where you do get caught up and held to account for your actions. And obviously the kind of level of confidence you have in the organization is going to be that's going to be a major factor, even if your kind of moral qualms are not. But there's no explanation of how those characters, or no exploration of how those characters are behaving in those terms. It's simply taken for granted that they are these kinds of men in suits. They are like the Men in Black. They turn up and they do bad stuff. And that's just their sole function in the story.
Now, there is a scene in this film where the guy from Special Branch basically says, you guys are going to get in trouble. I don't think that he knows the full extent of what they've done, but I think he has a good idea that they are operating extrajudicially. And I kind of wondered in that moment, and also this sort of sympathetic portrayal that he was given when he found out about Quist being detained, if he wasn't going to be their official man on the inside of the police in the future, if it went to future. The police are not all bad. The military, yeah, but the police, no. They're still, there's still some law and order in the universe, and that's our guy. And it didn't go anywhere. Those guys died, so no need to solve the problem in the legal sense. But yeah, it was well, one thing
he could have been the sort of Neil Stafford of the Doomwatch team.
Yeah,
but it still felt to me. I mean, I think that there are vastly more. I mean, again, you just look at the X-Files. Really, the much more sophisticated investigator or insights into the kind of interjurisdictional disputes between different branches of government. I mean, goodness me, this is at least 5 years after Between the Lines aired, where there were lots of interesting stories about things that were going on in Special Branch. They could have done better on this, I think.
Well, one question about the killer guys, or it's tangentially related. Ross went to work for the military. He said that. He went to work on a military project. And then the government sold the project off to private industry. So obviously that's a ding at Britain's rounds of privatization.
Yes.
Along the way. And I wonder if there is supposed to be a parable there about the fact that, some of the accountability, they get the power of having government auspices, if you will, but not the same level of accountability.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
so these guys who are military are now, that's what we train the military to do. Your job is to kill people. We tell you to kill, you go kill. And here it's being done by a private firm so the military can wash their hands of it. But at the same time, they've supplied the killers, they supply the money, they supply the authority, and bad things happen when you privatize. And this is one of them.
I'm fine with all of that. As I say, it's literally just this. The way they've realised it makes very little sense. There's no kind of in-story coherence to it, and dramatically, it doesn't aid the story. It's not interesting and it's not thrilling.
Now, question. Well, first off, observation. We do not have, or have not had in this country, tomorrow's world. But some of us have heard of it. Particularly if you watch any British TV, you'll hear of tomorrow's world. It is always a stand-in for people talking about what the future is going to be like. I gotta say, I think they must have stolen the car of the future, Hugo Cox's car, and his computers right out of somebody's. In the future, cars will have fax machines built in.
It's funny, isn't it? But that tomorrow's world sort of disappeared from popular consciousness over here. I mean, it's almost 20 years since it finished. Back then, you're absolutely right. It would have been on the tip of everyone's tongue. It was kind of common currency. Even if you didn't watch it, you knew what it was like. You knew what it was about. You knew its kind of style. And in a way, I mean, it predates Doomwatch, but it's a kind of counterpart to Doomwatch. It's not fictional, obviously, but it's like looking at technology, extrapolating it into the future. But instead of going, oh my God, look at all the things that could happen, you go, whoa, look at how cool everything could be in the future. And it was like in the car, Hugo Cox. I mean, I preferred it in the car, went to the stupid interfaces that he had in his posh mezzanine
loft.
But, but the computer we had in the car was just like Siri. I thought it was
Kind of.
it was almost farsighted.
It did feel to me like it. Of course, that was the first introduction to Hugo's technology. It did. That is the part in particular that felt like a Tomorrow's World skit in almost a company. It's like, we're going to have radar in cars, and there could be maps in cars, and you could even get your email read to you by a computer in the car. Need a printout? It can do it for you. And you sit at it, and it has that feel of, think of the things we might be able to do in the car and then implement them in a kind of awful way because we don't know what it's really going to look like. We're just spitballing ideas that you might do. But I'm thinking that probably even that hands-free arrangement that he had there was not good enough. He's reading computer screens while driving. I don't know why he needed a printout of the information.
Well, that's where I thought, this setup is better than Siri, because you try driving along and say, hard copy Siri, please, and see what happens.
That's right. Yeah. So it was funny. It was funny. It was also, they also got in his personality that is so, back to cliche, so incredibly cliche computer hackery guy. So he gets the radar detection. He's doing work in a car. He drives past the cops, and then he goes like, let's blast him with some opera and be a jerk to him.
Yeah.
That fell in the category of, wow, couldn't come up with a non-stereotype, could ya? Had to throw something out there to show that he's against the man.
I didn't get the Hugo Cox character at all. I mean, it didn't seem to fit at all.
He's necessary. I mean, without a supercomputer hacker, no TV show in the 90s about overcoming the government is gonna be able to function. You got to have that. That's the power, man. That's the future. Yeah. Everything's controlled by computers. So I mean, it's a little bit cliche. Let's call it what it is. But then, they had a big computer on Doomwatch, and they had a computer expert that was helping them out. So that one of all things kind of fits. The angel interface is both telling about the mental psychoses of Hugo Cox, and because he's God commanding a bunch of angels to do his bidding.
Okay,
But it's also a stupid interface.
Well, there's two things that really annoyed me about that computer. I mean, one is it literally was God, in the sense that there was no explanation of the extraordinary powers that it appeared to have, or the way it was able to access any information anywhere.
You mean the bit where he said, hack into that and get me that? How long will it take to hack into it? It's like 18 hours. Oh, well, then get some subcontractors and hack into it. Okay, 13 minutes. Great, let's go.
No, that's the other thing, which is why would you have an interface like that? Because regardless of how cool you think it looks, I'm not saying, the angels, but why would you have the ability to just speak to it? I mean, obviously we know what devices are like that you can just speak to, and the whole point of them is that they are massively simplified in terms of the interface, so you can do the things that you need as quickly as possible. And so this whole idea that you have to call up different angels to do different things doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You might build that into a game where you're actually trying to make tasks more difficult. But if you're talking about an application that is intended to be functional in some way, then you're going to make it as easy to use as you possibly can.
It's interesting that you say this. I'm not going to say this is spoilery, because it's not really spoilery, but I'll draw this to a technology parallel in Star Trek Picard that just came out. On board a ship in the Star Trek universe, they have not only hologram technology, but they had created a technology on the TV show 25 years ago called Emergency Holograph Medical Program, where when the doctor died, a hologram came in and was programmed with medical knowledge. This goes all the way back to Star Trek Voyager. And so they had a character who was the hologram because the doctor was killed and they just had to leave the thing on all the time. And it could, within its sphere of operations, the medical bay, it could physically touch things and move them and manipulate them and treat patients. So it had personality problems. It's that and the other one. So extrapolating forward 20 years to the future of Star Trek Picard, the captain of this ship has basically a crew of these emergency programs that appear when he needs them. So he's got one that's a doctor, and he's got one that's a navigator, and he's got one that's an engineer, and they're all him with different freaking personalities. They're all the same actor, and they're playing. One's a Scotsman, and another one's, Spanish and whatnot. And you're just looking at this going, what the hell is he thinking? Why does this make this easier? Why is this an improvement? Why not just have one interface that can do all of it? And let's say not have it look like you or I don't understand it. And I got this vibe off these angels. It's like, let's call up Azrael instead, or whichever angel he was calling up. It's like, that's the one that does hacking into security cameras. And this one hacks into, I don't know, databases. And that one looks up newspaper articles. Why? I don't get it. It's utterly meant to be like, wow, look what we could do with computers in the future, written by somebody who has no clue why that would be a dumb idea from a practical standpoint.
Yeah, which wouldn't in itself have been in the slightest bit mysterious in 1999 from anyone who knew anything about usability or interface design.
Right. You just look at that and go, yeah, this is just a bad idea. This is inefficient.
Yes.
Very inefficient. Yes. Even the fact that he has to summon them forth.
because all sorts of things change. But the basic fundamental principles, they don't change. It's the possibilities, the technology, the affordances of the technology. They all change all the time. So, of course, it's very difficult to imagine exactly what it's going to look like. But you can look at something and go, yeah, but that's just the principles underpinning that are just wrong. They'll never be right.
Yeah. It doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't make much sense. So yeah, I liked the fact that they had that resource available to them because it's a sonic screwdriver, but it was so
Mr. Smith
sadly done. Yeah. What else have we got here? Anything?
I think we've probably got to talk about the science.
Oh, there was science in this? Oh, wait. Yeah.
Well, it's a sci-fi plot. Because, early on, you and Ben were talking about Doomwatch. Is Doomwatch sci-fi? And sometimes, undoubtedly, it wasn't the science itself that was the fiction. So there's an argument to be made. It wasn't science fiction. Sometimes the science was extrapolated into the future. And so it would have, at least in, 1970, 71, 72, that would have been science fiction. In this, I think they were much more overt about making it a science fiction story. To a certain degree, I was riding along with this going, okay, I don't know much about black holes, and I'm not a physicist, but then again, a lot of the viewing audience aren't going to be a physicist, and if they're not quite sure about this, they'll maybe
argue most of them are not physicists.
Okay. So, you can say, I'm not trying to make out that I'm kind of the arbiter of what's, acceptable fiction in this, but a lot of it, they're talking kind of the pleasing techno babble that, gets you through these things. But there are quite a few points in this where you just go, oh my God, what? Like, even I am going to go, there is something strange about this gravity that can't get through a door in a rotting nuclear power station. They keep going on about how
that they can turn off.
Falling down.
because they were able to pass through it when they had it cycled down.
Oh God, yeah,
Remember?
I forgot about that. Yeah,
as they were going into the room, I didn't catch. I tell you what, I missed part of it, and again, this was not a film that made me want to go back and go, oh darn, somebody was talking during that 2 seconds. But when Zeist and Ross were heading to the room, they reached that door, and he said something blah 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 blah. With it off, if it weren't off, it would pull the fillings out of your teeth. And I assumed that they were talking about a huge electromagnet, because I know they had electromagnets in there. And so they had turned it on. That made perfect sense to me, but I didn't actually hear what he was talking about at that moment. They went through the room, they went onto the roof, they had their little conversation up there for no apparent reason, then went back down through the room and then turned on whatever it was again. Now Luke goes in there. What was it that was being drawn to it? If it was electromagnets, it's not him. It's not the fillings in his teeth. It looked like gravity.
That was the black hole.
Yeah, it looked like gravity of the black hole.
So the electromagnets, as I understood it, were being used to contain some aspect of it. Again, I'm not a physicist, but what we saw when Luke got dragged into it was the actual gravity. Later on, one of the men in black gets dragged into it. It's very, very evident from the way it's filmed that he's standing outside the door and he is not affected by it at all.
Yes,
he opens
absolutely.
the door and he is sucked into it,
sucked out,
as if he's pulled the door off an airplane fuselage in flight, and he's suddenly depressurized. It's that kind of effect, and you think, what is it that is in that door, in the rotting fabric of an old nuclear power station that is supposed to be gravity proof?
Well, I'm gonna throw this one out there then. One of the things, obviously, this has been a point of contention for forever in science fiction writers in particular, but also in science fiction movies and TV. Although movies and TV generally don't have this kind of dichotomy between hard science fiction and not. And in a way, I haven't gone through and 100% analyzed everything in Doomwatch, the series, but they certainly are trying to be closer to hard science fiction. And perhaps at the time that it was made, even things that we don't think of as hard science fiction were believed that they could be. And this has the trappings, but it's obviously not. This is magical black hole thinking.
Exactly. So if you look at an episode, pick one of the ones that we criticized for its kind of lack of realism or lack of basis in actual, the consequences of science that they're trying to extrapolate. The human time bomb is a good example, I think. We looked at that and went, well, it's not realistic we understand what they're trying to do, but in the portrayal within the episode of the effects that building had and the speed of those effects and the awareness people had of the effect on them and all of those things, I think we were quite critical of in the way it was done within that episode. But that was, I think, unintentional by the program makers. They were aiming for something there was some kind of real science behind it. They were trying to make a drama out of it in a way that was faithful to the science. And I think on the whole, all that early Doomwatch stuff was much more, in terms of the science, it was more about hard science than it was about science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas what I think you've got here is something that they would have known that this was nonsense. I mean, they couldn't have not known that it was nonsense because they had every opportunity. Yeah, if they'd asked someone, they would have found out. If they got a scientific
but they used
advisor.
Hawking.
So either they chose not to have a scientific advisor, or they ignored what they were told.
They threw out the name Hawking, so obviously they've done their research because he's like the go-to black hole guy.
Yeah,
it's this thing's going to go full Hawking on us. It's like,
do your research on the coffee table.
It's one of the things that, gets me about it is, and I'm sure you've heard this, when they were looking at firing up the Large Hadron Collider, there were, I'm going to say idiots, but there were people who were convinced that it was going to form micro black holes and suck the world into it and kill us all the moment they turned it on. There are people who were very much in that camp. And I have tried, from a not a physicist standpoint, to do a little looking into that. And I got the impression that that fell into the same category as the notion that the first atomic bomb might start a chain reaction that would wipe out all the hydrogen in the earth and instantly wipe us all out. That it was a thing that was postulated and quickly dismissed as not being within the parameters of the physics. It's like, that isn't going to happen. But nonetheless, there were still people that were, if they weren't for the physicists who had thought of it in the first place, then go, okay, you're right, it's not going to happen. Then there is the people who hear about it later, and then suddenly the mythos forms up. This is, oh no, people really thought that the entire Earth was going to blow up on the first atomic bomb. People really think that there's going to be a mini black hole forming when we turn on the Hadron Collider and wipe out the entire Earth. And it's not really. I mean, physicists correct me on that was basically ruled out in the mathematical models long before they ever turned the thing on. But it feels like that is partially what drove this story. Somebody heard that urban legend and long before the Hadron Collider. But
I don't necessarily have a problem with that kind of thing in itself, because that's kind of where the X-Files comes from. It takes these kind of conspiracy
The X-Files is not meant to be serious.
And Fortean time stories or whatever. Well, it is in some ways serious. I mean, the kinds of stories that you can tell with the X-Files are properly varied and can be incredibly dramatic, and in some cases quite sort of,
okay, but they're not cautionary tales.
Horrifying.
Doomwatch is a cautionary tale.
And that's the whole point about this. This is Doomwatch, and therefore the science, the science matters because it's about what could happen with real science. It's about the real problems that already exist, which are bad enough without inventing any new ones.
Yeah. So that was my thought.
On the other hand, I'm giving them massive bonus points for actually including the technobabble, reverse the polarity in a serious tone of voice.
I did hear that. What did you feel that Tanner Hill missed out on something important when he didn't go punch Zeist or Ross at the end? I felt like there were two situations when Tanner Hill was saying, no, you got to dump the whole grid in it. And Zeiss is going, you can't do the grid because it's the PR and the people will find out and we don't have we'll have to pay for it. That was a sad one. We'll have to pay for that. We'll have to pay for the power we're going to use to save the world. Yeah, you're going to be paying for this for a long time, buddy. And Zeiss, Tanner Hill says something like, if he speaks again, what did they say, throw him out?
Yeah.
Something like that. It's like, I thought for sure Zeiss was going to talk one more time and Tanner Hill was just going to roundhouse him. And then when it was all over and Zeiss said whatever dumb, oh, well, all's well that ends well, or whatever the heck it was he said to Ross, as Ross, slowly is getting out the cigarette and kind of walking past him. I thought as he was walking past him, he was going to level him. And I know that's, I realize that maybe that's an American TV thing, but at the same time, these guys were American cliches. Okay, they were cliche from word go.
Shows.
Yeah, but it still felt like the right thing to do from a dramatic standpoint. Is that guy needed to be hurt. He hurt a lot of people. He killed a lot of people. He endangered millions, billions, and I don't know. It feels like a good decking was at the very least he deserved that. From a standpoint of the story. I think you said this earlier, and I know I've said this during the course of the day. I really think Doomwatch is a show that could absolutely needs to exist.
Yes.
In this world, Doomwatch needs to exist. We need to have a show that is really talking about real dangers that we face, real problems. I would be heartbroken, destroyed if somebody came up with a Doomwatch show and, the first thing that they got up there and they were talking about the dangers of vaccines. And that would not be Doomwatch, right? But I could totally see that, but we have lots of technological things that we should be putting in front of your brains and letting you mull over what legitimately could be the consequences of these technological and scientific advances, because we do need to think about them. I'm 100% for technological and scientific advancement, but I'm 100% in favor of ethical scientific and technological advancement. And we need Doomwatch. We actually need Doomwatch. We don't just need the show. We need Doomwatch. But
absolutely,
this wasn't it.
No.
And I'm deeply disappointed in this program. Not just because I didn't think it was a very good film, but I'm just deeply disappointed at how they missed the point of the show instead and turning it into a disaster film. It has to be a disaster, but a fast disaster. Yeah.
Double disaster, double disappointment.
So, yeah, I'm going to say somebody forget this completely if they try to remake Doomwatch.
Oh, yeah, because
the original.
Because of what they did with Quist. This is as Doctor Who fans are fond of saying, this is not canon.
Yeah. He did not die. He's still out there. Doggone it. He was retired for being a pain in the ass, and he never gave it up.
In that way. Yeah. Whatever. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that. No. This is not Doomwatch.
Yeah. Well, Simon, unless you have anything else,
I've got one really important question to ask.
Okay.
You. Just at the end there, in all that nonsense with power, putting all the power into the black hole, and everywhere has gone blackout.
Okay, wait a minute.
You know what I'm going to ask. Go on.
I do. Did I ask why the hospital would go before the rest of the town?
No, it wasn't that. That's interesting.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I hadn't spotted that. No, I was wondering when Tannehill's mobile phone went, where he was getting the signal from.
I didn't notice that one. I did think about the phone, and I go, well, it's battery powered.
Yeah, but the mobile antenna,
cell towers, yeah. Well, you see, now that goes back to the hospital. Hospitals don't go out when the grid goes down.
Yes, that is
They've
also
got generators.
An excellent point. That is,
and I think cell phone towers do too. Not necessarily generators, but I think they have some power backup. At least some of them do. Of course, I don't know in 1999. Maybe that's a very different world. But,
I would be surprised in 99 because the coverage isn't even. Anyway,
I'm going to say.
It's a small point to pick on, but at that point, I'm just. Yeah.
I will say this. This is. I'm sure I've had this comment with you at some point along the way, but I'm going to point it out here. This is a show that exists on that cusp in time where now you would not be able to do this story the way you've done it because they spend way, way too much time leaving messages on answer phones.
Yeah.
Because nobody's got a phone with them.
There's that really nasty opening with the phone box. And you think, well, you just wouldn't do that because there are no phone boxes anymore.
Yeah. But also, okay, yes, I call Quist and he doesn't answer his phone because nobody actually answers their phone. It goes straight to voicemail. But you don't have to wait for him to get home to check his answering machine or not, or you send him an email or all of that is gone. And yet some of the people did have phones. It's like cell phones.
To be fair, 99 was like that. There were some people with phones.
Right.
I even knew some of them.
It was on the cusp of this change. And it felt to me like the writers it feels to me like writers were a little bit slow on the uptick to kind of adapt to that world. Even on the X-Files, I remember thinking, at this point, well, wouldn't they
in particular,
whip out their cell phone and call?
Quist would have a cell phone, wouldn't he?
I would think so, but then on the other hand, technology, it's probably bad. So maybe he's, he lives in a little cottage, probably has no computers or technology of any kind. He writes equations out by hand on paper. He could be a hermit. He could be a techno hermit at this point. He could be a cranky old crazy guy. So I don't know. We didn't get enough of him. I mean, all we got was tired old man.
Yeah.
In the course of this. So that it?
That's it.
All right. Well, Simon, thank you for
ending.
joining me. Yeah.
It's been a pleasure, though. Doomwatch has been a really interesting show.
It has. Listeners, I do hope you'll join us all again next time on Fusion Patrol. You've been listening to Fusion Patrol, a listener-supported podcast. Find out how you can be a sponsor and get early access to all episodes and more at patreon.com/Fusion Patrol. Come join the conversation on Facebook or Twitter. All episodes are available at FusionPatrol.com. Our music is Fight the Future by Amber Wolf. This has been a Lone Locust production.